Hey, welcome ladies and gentlemen to another tutorial. In here we are talking about APIs. So I want to explain how you connect to an API and what really APIs do. Now, if you want more in-depth tutorial of this subject, I have a link in the description to a whole playlist of videos I made where we describe APIs and actually create our own API and read data from it. All right, so this one will be some kind of a summary of the topic. And if you want to learn the basics of PHP, I have a video as well, link in the description. All right, so let's get started. So what exactly is an API? If you Google this word, what is an API? It will tell you that it's an application programming interface. This is what API stands for, application programming interface. So what this really just means is application is just some software. An interface is something you use to communicate between two things, I guess. So what an API really is just communication between two applications or two technologies. So those technologies can be totally different. Let's say you have a program that you wrote in PHP. You can communicate with another program you wrote in Java or JavaScript, etc., etc. Doesn't really matter the language you're using for each program, but you find a way for those programs to talk to each other. Now, this may sound a little complex at first, but the moment you open a website, you're actually accessing an API. It's just not the usual API you're used to, but it is indeed an API because your browser right now is talking to a server somewhere, and I have no idea what the language is on that server, but I know that if I click a button here, the information will be transferred from that server to my web page here, which is exactly what's happening on this Google page right now. So this is literally an API. So now to get in depth on this matter, let's look at a few public APIs here so we can see what's going on. Now, let me actually just use an illustration for a second here so that we get more information on how these things work. So let's say I have a program and I do actually use an API on my own website. So I'm going to describe that in detail a little bit. So let's say you have a website here that you created. So your website is happily sitting on this server here, and a user comes to your website here and they click a button, for example, and this button is supposed to enable the user to view maybe the weather in a particular place. So of course you don't know how to code and you don't even have the satellite data for the weather in your area. So you can't possibly have that information on your website. But what can you do? Well, there could be a public API here, and what that is just another server here that actually has access to that kind of information. So this access could be in the background, like maybe a database here, or maybe actual access to a satellite or something where that information is pulled from. It doesn't really matter. Now, the point is your website may have to go and fetch information on this other server here, and then the server will return this information here, which will be described or shown to the user. Now, the user obviously is on their own device over there, like so. So when they click, they actually make a request to your application through their browser, and then the application will make another request to this other server right here, and the information will come back, and then that information will be displayed finally to the user over here. Now, like I said already, when a user is making a request, this is still an API call. It's just that we're not used to this kind of thing as being an API. But obviously here, this is going to be a real API call that we're trying to look at here. And the reason this is an API is because when you are communicating between, this is one application that's very different from another application here. So there's an interface going on here. So the owner of this server here the one that has the satellite data, will set the rules on what kind of request you can make to get certain kind of data. So the one who programmed this website right here will have to know how to make an actual call to this website so they can get the information required. So these guys here will set the rules. If you follow the rules, you will get the information you want, right? So they'll tell you something like you have to make a post request, either it's a GET request, depending on the rules that are involved. And if you want to get this kind of information, this is what you type, etc., etc. And one thing to keep in mind is your program could be coded in PHP here, right? But the other program over here could be in Java. So these are two completely different languages, but they have to communicate somehow. And the way they do that is in form of strings. No matter how different a programming language is, strings are strings. Because at the end of the day, every computer just reads zeros and ones. So they're just a string of information at the end of the day. So which means a string is universal to any language. So what happens here is that when this application here, the website is trying to make a request, it will convert that request into a string of data. So this could be 0101 bytes of data here. And then that information is sent through other servers in between here, wires, wirelessly, depending on the situation, because these computers can be thousands of miles apart. And then once the information gets here, this one interprets it into something usable, and then it sends back another string of data, which will be interpreted by this over here. Now, there's a standard that we use to communicate in string format. A long time ago, we used to use what is known as XML. So XML was like a universal language that any language you can use between languages to communicate, because it's just a string of data, but formatted nicely, almost like HTML. However, the problem is that XML has a lot of overhead, because what I mean is that you type a lot of extra information in order to format your data. So it ends up being very bulky. And so a new format, which is more genius than the XML, was created. And that format is known as JSON. Like that. JSON. So this is just short for JavaScript object notation, because it follows the system of JavaScript in creating its object. So JSON is a language you can use just like XML to talk between APIs. But JSON is lighter because the information you need to format to tell the other computer how to organize the data is much less than inside XML. So I can give you an example here real quick. An XML document kind of looks like HTML, where you have an opening and a closing tag like so, and then you have your data in here like that. Okay, so there could be data and there could be attributes in there, etc., etc. However, in JSON, it's just a string. Instead of having those opening and closing tags, the same data could be represented just like that. So this is an array with a single item in there as in form of text written as data. Okay, so already just with this, you can see that this is already longer than this. Now, if the document is huge, you find that XML way exceeds the data that you run through JSON. So, of course, we are not going to be using XML. We will be using JSON because that's the new school stuff, and it's much cleaner, and there are a lot of tools to manipulate using JSON. So hopefully you are understanding what's going on here. So API, the moment you hear API, the only thing that should come to your mind is that communication between two programs. That's all. It's just communication between two programs. How that is achieved is usually through JSON. Okay. All right. So let's begin by looking at what really we need in order to communicate with at least one of these APIs. So let's check out these free APIs. So you can just Google this document over here. So there's this one called JSON placeholder. So this one is JSON placeholder dot. I think you can just Google it, and if we did a Google here for JSON placeholder, I think there we go. So the website will come up, and there it is. So this is a free FEC API for testing and prototyping. All right, so this is great. We don't really JSON server. It doesn't really matter what the server is here. Let's just look at the rules. Okay, so we go down here and it says try it. So run this code here in the console from any site. Okay, so there's a fetch here going on, and then a response, and then there's a console.log JSON. Okay, so simple enough, right? You can say run this script, and this is what you get. Okay, so let's test this and see if we can actually run it. So I'm just going to copy this code over here. So copy that, and let's come here. Let's create a new document. So I'm going to create a folder. Now, just make sure that you install your server, and Apache, which is our server, is running, and we are good to go. So whatever server you're using doesn't really matter. You can use the built-in PHP server. That'll be fine. Mongoose, doesn't matter. So here I just want to I created a folder in the htdocs folder, htdocs thingy here. So I'm going to go drag and drop this in here in my text editor. So you can use any text editor. I'm using Sublime Text as always. So here I just want to create a new file. I'm going to call this one index.php. Great. It doesn't have to be a PHP file. It can be .html. It'll still work since we're using HTML anyway. Or we're using JavaScript, sorry. So here I'm going to, let me put a title, APIs, like so. So that's the basic HTML template. And here I just want a div that I can grab and do stuff with. So I'm going to put an ID here and just say result. I'm just going to call this one result. That way we can grab this and put some results in there. And then I will put some script tags so that we can put some JavaScript in there. Okay, pretty straightforward. And then I will paste the data that I got from the other side. So let me just tab it in just so it's clear what's going on. Now here it tells us console.log the JSON, right? So it's going to show up in the console, but I want it to show up here. But for now, let's leave that be, right? So let's keep that as it is. And I'm going to come back here and let me open a separate thing, localhost. So I have a folder that I created called APIs and / and then I have an index.php in there, index.php, and press enter. So we don't see anything, obviously. So we're going to have to right click, inspect, because things are supposed to go in the console. And as you can see, we have an object here that came back with some data. Look at that. That is some data. But I want to see the data over here instead. So what I'm going to do, instead of console.log the JSON, what I'll do is I'm going to grab a document dot query selector. So this one expects this to be JSON information, right? Because we did response.json. So it was converted to an object. So we can't really see the object here. So we may have to parse it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document.querySelector. I want to grab this item here. So query selector, let's do this. And in there, I will put an ID. So hash result. So whatever item has got that ID will be grabbed. And then we'll do a dot inner HTML and then is equal to, and we're going to equate it to that JSON object right there. So of course, what we're going to see is just the word object there, as you can see there, because that's an object. But what I can do is I can say JSON.stringify, like that, because that's how you convert in JavaScript. That's how you convert an object or whatever item you want to send and convert it to a string so you can send it as JSON. So you use the JSON object and then you say dot stringify like that. So what I'm trying to do here is convert that object into a string. That way I can actually display it here. Okay, so let's try that out again, and I'm going to refresh, and there we go. So this is the data that we got from the internet. There it is. Look at that. May not be very clear what's going on, but this is how JSON data looks like. So you can see here there's a user ID, which is one ID, one title. This is the title, completed, false. So this could be a post, for example. Now, if you notice here, it says to-dos /1. So I'm assuming this is a to-do list that I'm grabbing here, and this is the first entry. That's why we have a /1 there. So this makes it a GET request. So the reason it's a GET request is because this is just a link, a URL link. So every time you open a URL, you're making a GET request. Now remember what I told you, that even when you're just opening a browser, you're actually accessing an API. So what I can literally do, I don't need all this code here. I can just grab this link and copy it and just go to a new tab and paste it in there, quite literally like that. And as you can see now, I get exactly the same data. If I want, I can check the raw data here, and this is how it looks like, right? If, imagine, I change the number there to 2, for example, I'm assuming there's a record number 2. So if I click there, my internet is a bit slow, but there we go. And you see there's ID 2 there, and this is a different record right there. Now, if I want to get all the to-dos, I think I just need to remove the number at the end. Now, this rule is actually set by the people that created this API. It's not me that creates these rules. You have to follow the rules of the people that created the API because they designed it to run a very specific way. So I know this because I went through this documentation here. So always read the documentation. Take time to read the documentation. So if I just press enter, now I get all the to-dos in the record. So you see there's 0, 1, 2, 3. So many records here, quite extensive actually. This goes up to 199. So that's like 200 records since it starts at 0. So you get 200 records of to-dos. So which is the same here. Looking at the link that I have, if I just remove that thing over there, number 1, to specify which item I want to grab, and go back to my designed API and refresh, I should get a very long list of items. As you can see here, this data is coming from that API, even though it's not very well organized, but you can tell there's quite an amount of data there. Okay, so as you can see, just to recap here, to connect to an API, all we have to do is either use a GET or a POST request. So any method you can use to create, because there are many ways to create a GET request or a POST request. Because if I just open a browser and paste in the link to something there, already that's a GET request. So I'm making a request to a server and I get results like this. I can click raw data here to see the actual raw data, which is this over here, if you want to see that kind of stuff. All right, and then the second way is to make a POST request. These are the most common, POST and GET requests. Now there are many types of requests. There are options, there are put, there's delete, and many others. So, but we're going to concentrate on only the GET and POST request. All right, so how can we use this to do something more advantageous, right? I don't like using the fetch API instead. I like using the XML the old-fashioned way because I can do much more than what I can do with fetch. But fetch is the modern way of doing things, so you can learn about that as well, which is exactly what I actually use in the playlist that I linked in the description. But here what we want to do is, let's make this more interesting. Let's add a button here. So I'm going to put a button and say fetch information so that we actually fetch when we want. So I'm going to click fetch. Here I'm going to put an on-click listener so that when I click on it, I can run a function. I'm just going to call that function I don't know, I can call it connect or something so that we know we're connecting to an API. So then let's create that function here. So I'm going to do function and call it connect and do that. All right. Oops. There we go. Very good. So here, what I want now is to know the URL. So whenever you're connecting to an API, the first thing you have to know is the link. What URL are you supposed to connect? Because that's a link to the server. And then you have to know the params that are involved there as well. So in this case, I want my URL. So I'm going to say let URL is equal to. So let's paste that URL in there. So this is the URL we got from the API homepage here. Let me get back here. There it is. So from that code, we grabbed that, right? And then if you go down here, you can see what other resources you can do. You can check for posts or comments or albums or photos even. There's like 5,000 photos, to-dos, and users. This is pretty interesting. So I can click on photos to see how that's done. I think there's probably extensive data. And there it is. If I go to the raw data here, this is how things look like. So these are links to the actual thumbnail, and the URL to the photo is right there. Okay, this is interesting as well. So we can do that. There's 5,000 photos. So I'm sure when you do /photos/1, you get the first photo. All right, so great. So now how do we make a connection? Let's make an XML. We're gonna call it XHR is equal to new XML HTTP request, like that. So you see, because a long time ago we used to use XML, that's why it's called XML HTTP request, but we use JSON now. But the name stuck, I guess. So we're going to do xhr.open and then xhr.send. This is all you need to remember. You can create the object, then of course you open the object, and then you send that data. Now a bit later on we're going to use PHP, pure PHP, to do exactly the same thing, because you can do this in both JavaScript and PHP depending on your system. It doesn't really matter what you prefer. Usually you use JavaScript if it involves user interaction in a specific way, but then you can use PHP if you want things to be automatic. For example, maybe you want your website to make an API call at I don't know, maybe a specific time of the day, or when the user is doing something, I don't know, but you don't want any visual reference in the front end. You can use just PHP to do that in the background. Okay. So here we can send stuff, text, objects, whatever. But here we're not sending anything. We just want to receive data. So the send will remain open like this, because at the same time you make this request, you can send data and also you can receive data. So when we open, we have to tell it what kind of request are we making. Since we are not sending any post variables or any data, we can just call this a GET request. Doesn't really matter what you choose there, really. You can put post. It's pretty much, the line is really blurred between the two. So get is where you put, this is where you put the URL. So let me just put URL there, and then here we put true to make sure that it runs in the background and doesn't freeze our interface when this is running. Okay, so this is really all you need. The other thing though is you need to receive the information. So in order to receive the information, you have to listen in for a response. So we add an event listener before we actually open and send stuff. So we start listening before we send. So I'm going to do xhr.add event listener. So let's add an event listener like that. And what are we listening for? You can listen for the load event. I think actually that works as well. But let's listen for the ready state change. Just one word like that. And every time the ready state changes, we'll run this function over here. Okay, so let's do that. So the state will change 4 times. This is how the XHR object works. It's got 4 states, and when it's on state number 4, it means we have a result. So this though we are interested in, so I'm going to do xhr dot status, not the status though, the ready state. If the ready state is 4, then we have received a result. Okay, and then we come down here and we echo the result. So here we're going to do document dot query selector, like that. So document.querySelector, and in here we select that item again, the result, and then we'll do, once we grab it, we're going to do dot inner HTML is equal to, now here we get our result from xhr.response text. Now you can get this from response JSON as well. I think it's like that, but the thing is, we're not expecting JSON data. It's always better. I always just use text even when I'm expecting JSON data, because I don't want errors there if the result happens to not be proper JSON. So that's all we need to do. So here, let's recap a little bit. This is our URL. We create an object to send a request. So what this object does is that it creates either a get, a post, or a put, delete, whatever kind of request. So it just makes an HTTP request. So once you grab that, you can then add an event listener to listen for when we get the result. And then we open it, and then we send some data, which is equivalent of just grabbing whatever is there on this link here and seeing the result. So let me save this, and let's come back to our API here, and I'm going to refresh that. So now we've added a cool button here. Only after we fetch do we see something. So I'm going to click there, and immediately you see that. Okay, so this is great, right? But remember that the URL we have here has a number at the end here, which means if we cycle through the numbers, we can actually get different records. All right. So here, what I'm going to do is just put something here that I can interact with. I'm going to put an input field, which is of type number. So here I just want to, let me put a break tag over there. Here what I want is just to grab the whatever number is in here as the value and use that at the end there. That way I can cycle through the records, right? So here I want to put an ID to this so I can grab it as well. This one I'm gonna call it ID or record underscore ID, like that. Okay, so what we're gonna do is when we are sending this information, instead of creating the URL like this, what I'm gonna do is just say let ID is equal to, and then we're going to do document.querySelector one more time, and this time we're grabbing the record ID item there, the record ID item dot value. So we're looking for the value of that input field here. So hopefully to be a number. We won't do any checking or sanitization here, but we actually could. We can just parse it as an integer. We're going to say ID is equal to parse int, like that, and then put ID in there just to make sure we are describing it as an integer. So grab it there, and then we replace that integer, just put a plus there and put ID, like so. So whatever ID we grab there, we're putting there, and then we can always click the fetch button one more time to get what we want. So here we need a default value at least. So I'm just going to put value here at 1, like so, just so we have a default value. So I'm going to refresh that, and let's zoom in. So there's 1 there, and if I click fetch, it actually works. If I go to 2 and click fetch, just give it a minute, and there it is, a different record. Number 3, click, there we go. Number 4, click. Let's try record number 400. here. Is there a record number 400? Nothing. So you see it brings an empty result. Let's try record number 0. Let's see there. Still brings an empty result. What about record number 20? Click, and there it is. So this is how simple it is to actually read from any API. Simple and straightforward. Now, sometimes an API would ask you to send some header information. So we're going to see how to do that as well. But before we go there, let's check out the other APIs here and see at least a difference on how things work, right? So there's Google Translate here. Okay, so there's actually an API for this. Okay, let's take a look. I haven't seen this before. There's also Open Weather Map. Okay, need to look. Yeah. There we go. REST countries. Let me try this one. I'm looking for something that's not too complex. Let's open that. So there's an API here. You can start free, of course. This needs some sign up. I'm looking for something that doesn't need any sign up or login or something like that. Let's see, REST countries. Okay. So the documentation is what matters here. So so this website will be shut down. It says by the end of May. Oh, that's very sad. Okay, so it seems this one will be gone soon, so let's ignore it for now. Let's go to another. What is this one? Is a service that provides you with information about IP addresses. Random data. Okay, let's look at this one. Random data API. There's another one that there are those APIs that for example, let me check this out. Profile images, right? Profile image free API. Let's see here. APIs to generate random user avatars. So this is what I want here. These UI avatars generate within issues. Okay, that sounds great. Let's check this out. Okay, uiavatars.com. Okay, daily requests. Okay, that's great. So let's go. Okay, great. So here, all requests returns an image stream to be used directly in the image tag. Okay, great. Generate a avatar with default settings for user. Okay, so this is how you use the get request. So this get here is telling us that this is a get request. So if I click try, and there it is. Okay, so this is an avatar with initials, right? Let me try this one as well. Oh, JD. Okay, great. I see what they did there. Okay, so image size, you can put sizes in there. So I'm gonna click there and let's see. Right. Okay, so this is interesting as well. So some APIs you just put directly in your URL. So if I grab this one, if I copy this right there, oops, I actually ended up clicking that, and go to my my content here, I can put this inside an image tag directly like so, and that'll be it. That's just how you use the API, I guess. So let me go back here to my page. So if I now refresh my page, I should see an image there with JD, John Doe. Let me just say Mary plus Jane, like that. So it should show MJ. There we go. So that's how the API works. So as you can see, this is very simple because all we are doing actually is just accessing a URL here directly, and then it says this URL returns an image stream, right? Now, if you don't want to do it like this, you could actually let's do this. If I put that image thingy there and replace, let me see if I okay, I think we shouldn't go too deep into that, but this is how some of those APIs work. As long as you read the information from a server, that's really it. Now, there are times when you need to send more information than just the URL. Maybe you need to send some post data. So in that situation, we're still going to send some post data here, even though it's not required, but I just want to show you how you can do that. So all you have to do is create a form. For example, if you're using this JavaScript, you just create a form. You say let's call it my form is equal to new form data, like that. Okay, so this is creating a form. So if there's any fields that I need to submit, I can just say my form dot append, like that, and then I put a key value pair. So here I'm going to say something like maybe name. Maybe it's required to have a name, and the name is John, like that. You append, and then you can append as many things as you want. Here maybe you need to submit a secret key or something, so you can say key is equal to, and then you submit whatever that key is, something like that. And then once you're done, this my form is what you send here, like that. And then sometimes you may be required to send some headers, right? Maybe certain information should be sent through headers instead. So in that case, you're going to do XHR, like that, and then you say let's set response headers. Is it? Let's try that. Content type image JPEG. So you can put any data here for the header. As actually it's not response, it's request. Sorry. So set request header, like that, and then you set your header. So let's try and see if this will still bring us the information we need. Let me click fetch. Obviously, we'll get back the information, or will we? Let me see what errors we got. Let's go to the console. It says at least 2 arguments are required, but only 1 is passed. Okay. Okay, so 2 arguments are required. Now, if you find yourself with a situation like this, all you have to do is just Google it. You just say JS set request header, so that you figure out how the function actually works. So set request header, a method. Okay, so let's click there, go to mozilla.org. This is the best place to learn JavaScript from. So there it is. It tells you, it sets a value of an HTTP request header. Yeah, you must call it after calling open. Okay, so those are the rules. You have to call it after open. So let's move it down after the open. And then before calling send. Okay, so we are right on spot there, right in the middle. If this method is called several times with the same header, the values are merged together. Okay, so each time you call this one, after the first time you call it, the specified text is appended to the end of the existing. So what this means is that I can call request headers 10 times and all the headers will be added together and sent. Excuse me. Okay, so let's see here. For security reasons, there are several forbidden header names whose values are controlled by the user agent. Okay. So in addition, the authorization HTTP header may be added to the request, but it will be removed if the request is redirected cross-origin. Okay, so cross-origin just means if you want to, it's forbidden to get resources from a different server than the file that you are actually requesting. So for example, here, I'm requesting this from my local host, and I'm requesting to another server, which is this one right here. So this is actually forbidden. But if you're the owner of the server and you want people to be able to send requests like this, you actually put some headers in there to allow that. So the only reason we can do this is because this is allowed. If, for example, I try to fetch data from google.com, it's going to fail. Let me show you that just in a moment. I'm going to mute that, and let me go here and just say google.com. It doesn't really matter what I put at the end, as long as I just say google.com like this. So let me test this out just to prove the point. If I go here and refresh, I'll get some errors in here which say cross origin request, blah, 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 not allowed, etc., etc. So it's still trying to load. I guess my internet is that slow. Oh, no, I have to click the fetch button, sorry. Okay, so there we go. It says cross origin request blocked. The same origin policy disallowed reading remote resource. So if I was testing this on my own server, instead of trying to read from google.com, I'm reading from my own server, then it will actually, I can actually put some headers in my PHP code, and the header I put is the same. It's like this. You put this code in your PHP code. Right at the top of the page, you say header, like that, and then you say allow. Actually, you say access control. Allow origin, like that, and full colon and a star there, and then semicolon. Then you can put whatever code you want in your API. Just by putting that there, then you allow anyone to read from your server. So you only do this if you are building an API, which we do in the other tutorials that I was talking about, if you want to check them out. Okay, so here, for example, I did that in my on my website. So let me undo this. I'm going to just do this and mute this. So on my website, which is freephptutorials.com, so you can do freephptutorials.com, like that. So I can read from my own website like that because I did allow that to happen. So if I do fetch like this, oh, let me actually refresh the page and do fetch, you will see my page being loaded here, as you can see there. So the CSS, of course, may not be the best because of the way we are loading this, but you can see that I'm loading my own page inside this other page right here. This is a real website that I'm loading, and I can only do this because I allowed this in my server to be able, for me to be able to do this. So it's a security feature that was added so that you only allow this if you want to. Okay, so as you can see, I've read data from my website through my API. So even just normal websites are APIs as well, like mentioned before. So let me remove that. Let's get back to business here. All right, so this is how you send extra data, but let's look at this set request headers one more time here. So let's see an example here. So it's a method here, and it's got a header and a value. So actually those two things should be set differently. So it's just me that didn't do it the right way here. So what I was supposed to do is put two values. So content type is the key, and then I can put a comma there, and image JPEG is the value. Okay, so if we do that, things should work as intended. Let me get back here and refresh the page and click fetch again, like that. Let's go back and inspect and see what it's complaining about now. Invalid header name. So that header does not exist. Okay, great. So let's go. If you don't know the headers, you just say HTTP headers. Okay, so these are HTTP headers that are allowed. So you only do this. Now, normally you wouldn't need to search for these headers because any API will tell you what they're looking for. So let's try, for example, let's look at the Stripe. Let's look at Stripe, for example. Stripe is a payment gateway, and they obviously have documentation on their system here. So if we do go to stripe.com here, we can go to the documentation. and see what's going on. So let's see developers. If I click on that over here, developers, let's look at the libraries. Let's see, documentation, API, full API reference. Okay, so if I click on that, of course, then I get the API reference, which is right here. And I just want you to see the best URL. It tells you the best URL of the API, right? So if I just grab this and just go to my URL here and paste, I should see something, you see? And then it just tells me that this is an unrecognized URL get request. If you're trying to list object, remove the trailing slash, blah, 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 it gives you information, but at least you are seeing some data, which means you're accessing the API. If you click here, you see the raw data that was received. Just like that, you've accessed the API. But because we didn't follow the rules, this is why it's saying unrecognized request. You have to follow the rules. For example, you need to have an account, you need authentication. For example, here, it shows us authenticated request. This is how it should look like. So this is the URL, for example. Let's copy that. If we try and paste it in there, it asks us to log in, right? Great. That's because here we need some login details to be sent through the header. So this is just an example of information here you may get. So they will give you everything you need, the request headers, whatever you require in order to do your thing. So if you're given that, this is how you send those headers. But let's see some valid headers first of all. So if I come back here to where we were, these are headers right here. So authentication, there is authorization, cache control. So all I'm looking for is content type. I think it's content dash type, not the way I have put content slash type like that. But all these are a list of headers you can use, and it shows you exactly what those headers do. So let me try and find the one with content. Content disposition, right? There we go. There's also cache control. Wait, I'm looking for content type, right? Where there it is. So it's content dash type. There it is. This is the header name. So if I put it here, it's content dash type, and I forgot the capitalization as well. And there we go. So image JPEG. So just by doing that, I'm telling it that the result I'm getting should be JPEG, right? Which is wrong actually, but let's try and see what happens. Okay, it still gives me this, it doesn't really care. All right, so that's how you can send, that's how you can make a request to any API like this. So just follow the rules, look at the URL they're giving you, follow the rules. If they want you to send some fields, you send them like this in form of this. If they mention that you're sending fields in form of JSON, then just put the JSON data directly in there as a string. But if you're sending a form like this, you put it in there. And then you can set your headers like this, and then you can listen for a result like this. It's as simple as that. Now, the other way, the final way, the second way we're going to learn how to do this is using PHP directly. So here, as you can see, I'm getting this information. If I click the fetch button here, and then I get the information. So quite right. But if I'm using PHP, I won't have the luxury of clicking the button. I'll just refresh the page and the data should be there because PHP does not react to buttons and stuff. So what I'm going to do now is, so as you can see here, first of all, if I just refresh the page, it doesn't show any data until I click fetch like that. Okay, so now I want to use PHP to fetch the data in advance here. And it's pretty much the same thing. So we're just trying to change this. But in PHP, we use what is known as curl. So let me put PHP like that, PHP tags, and close that. So it's CURL, like this, CURL. So you can Google what that is. So it's a way to fetch data using PHP to create a post request or a GET request from within PHP, just like we do with this XML HTTP object. So in here, how we do it is by just initializing. We're going to call it CH because that's the preferred way that PHP calls it. So we're just going to say curl init like this, which is short for initialization, like that. So very simple stuff. You just initialize it and then you do curl set options like that. And then you set your options and then you curl execute like that. Okay. Sorry about that. And then curl close. Pretty straightforward. So you initialize it, you set your options, you execute, and then you close. This is very similar to here, where you create the object, and then you open it, and then you execute, you send, and then you grab the result. So here, the exec is what brings us the result. So I can just say result is equal to execute. Now here I will change these to the variable ch here, and then you can set an option here and its value. So in our case, for example, if we want to set options like a header, so I want to set this header exactly like this. So here I'm just going to tell it that the option I'm setting is a header. Now this is an integer here. The options are integers. So number 4 means something, number 6 means something, number 9 means something, but it's difficult to remember these integers. So instead you use constants. So all the constants for curl, they start with curl opt like that. Okay, curl opt, and then the thing like the header, for example, like that. So you see it bend like that, then you know you have the right value. So this is just a constant that represents a number. So I'm just going to grab this header. Let's come here, copy that, and let's put that header over here as a value. Oops. Let's do that. Oops. Paste. Okay. So in this case, because there are not two values, it's one string, we're going to do that. Okay. So as usual, you can set as many headers as you want and put all the required headers in there. It will append to those. And another option you can set is the URL. So the URL, and then we put our URL there. So our URL in this case is this one, right about here. So I'm going to grab this. Oops. My mouse is fighting me. So let's come here and let's put our URL link in there. Boom. Like that. Okay, let's put number 1 there so that we just get the first item. So we've set our URL, we've set our header. Now, if you want to send a post request like these post values we were doing here, instead of doing this, you're gonna do curl post like that, and you set that to true, meaning that you are actually sending a post request. And then you can use post fields now here. There's post fields like that. And then you put your post fields in here as an array. So you can just put an array like this and say maybe name. That's how you make an array. John, like that. And then you can put many items in there just by doing this, right? Then put a comma. And let's go ahead and put fields in there. So the age, 24, etc., etc. You can even send files just like this. Yep. So or last name like this. Whatever names of fields you have. Let's say this is a post request. Maybe email and password. You want to send those. You can send them like this. and then execute, and then there you get the result, right? So let's test this out. I'm just gonna refresh the page. Let's see if we get any errors. We didn't, which is good, but we don't see anything because the result is set inside this result thingy here. So we have to actually echo the result to see it over here. So I'm gonna grab this and let's refresh. And there it is. Boom. Wait, why is there a 1 there? That's weird. Let's try this again. Okay, so that shows the correct thing. But if I refresh the page, that's what I get. Why do I get that? This is weird. Okay, let me not put a 1 at the end there. Let me just do that. Oh, maybe because of this header type. Let me remove that header over here. Let's just try and do this. Okay, so we're getting better and better. 201, what is going on? Okay, so let me remove these fields that I don't need in my case. Okay. So all we are doing is just setting a URL and executing it. As simple as that. Okay, so great. Let's refresh. And there we go. Look at that. It's much better. So let me put a /1 at the end there. So these options were messing up the request because they were making certain things mandatory. So unless they are necessary, don't add them there. So if I refresh, now I get that information. So clearly as you can see, the bare minimum is like this. Okay. So you set your URL, you execute, and then you echo your result. Close and echo the result. As simple as that. That's how you connect to any API that is out there. So you can put any link in there. For example, this one we had gone to generate an avatar. So if I copy this and just put the URL in there, it will return me the data. Now this will be visual or image data that I'm returning here. So let me try this out. If I return like this, you see, there we go. We have the image data returned there, and it shows us the image, right? Wait a second, why? Where am I getting that 1 from? Let me not echo the result. Let's come back here and let me refresh. Ah, right. What is... Ah, right, there we go. Okay, so the result is actually a 1. So when we do cur exec, this is weird. Cur close, cur exec. Let me undo this for a second. Let me go back to our list here. I think I'm... Ah, right. Okay, so you see what's happening here is that if I do cur exec here, I don't need to actually echo anything because it's not returning the result. This is not doing a return. It's like echoing the result right there without me having to grab it. But if I want the result to actually go into a variable so that I can echo it when I want or use it when I want, maybe I don't want to just display the data like that. If I don't want to do that, then we go back to, let's go and find, let me do PHP curl. So if I go to PHP here, the PHP page, this is php.net, of course. This is where you can get all the information you want about something that pertains to PHP. So here I'm looking for curl set opt. There's an array version, but let's click this one that we are using right now. We set options, and then it gives us a list of the options here. So there's one which says return result. That's what I want to find here. Let me try and find the version that says return. So this one is curl return transfer. That's the option I'm looking for. True to return the transfer as a string of the returned value of curl exec instead of outputting it directly. Okay, so instead of us outputting this directly, because sometimes this is ideal, this is what you want, you output it directly. As you can see here, it outputs the data directly before I echo it, but we can set an option here, and there it is, return transfer, and let's set that to true. So once we set it to true, this will not echo directly anymore, it will return the data, so we have to capture the data in order to use it. So as you can see there, it doesn't work, but now when I echo the result, it actually does work. So if I refresh, there we go. All right, very good. This could be handy, for example, let's say here where we are grabbing the where is this one, where we are getting an image instead, right? We're not getting this content, we are getting an image instead. So let me change that URL to that image. Now it wouldn't be nice if we just echo it directly. So if I remove the header here that does that, you will notice that the moment I refresh the page, the image comes up. But sometimes I may want the image to be put in a very specific place, right? So then I'll tell it to return the transfer. Then I'll have to echo the result. So let's come back here. Let me try and echo the result, and there it is. So if I now inspect this part, you see that where is the returned result? Okay, so SVG. So it actually returns an SVG. Wow, okay. An inline SVG. I guess that's why it works, right? So maybe I want to actually echo this a little further down the road. So I can do that after maybe the fetch button here. Then I can put my PHP tags and echo it over there. That way I fetch it and then use it later. So that moves down here like so. All right, so this is how you run this CURL or curl as it is called, or how you can use the XML HTTP request to access an API of any type. All right, so you can, as a homework, you can go through all the APIs that you can find that are free, like this one that gives you random data. Let's check this out for a second. It says get started, it's free. If you click here, generate random data, so it's generating over here. It's a very easy to use APIs. So I can just grab this information right there, this URL, grab it, and just come here and replace that. And just like that, I will have new data. Let me just undo so that the echo comes at the top here, and then I can paste my URL. It's as simple as that, since these are free APIs. Now those where they require you to sign up and log in, it's the same process. It's just that you need an account and a key to access the API. And in order to send the key, they give you instructions on how to do that. You either send the key through post options or post variables like this, or through the header, which is you do it this way. So depending on the requirements of that API, you're going to have to follow that. So if I refresh now, it's supposed to get me the data. And look at that, simple as that, I get the data that I want. I can of course now organize that data in form of JSON. Now this data I get is a string, right? But in PHP, you can convert that data. Instead of echoing the data like this, I can convert the data into an array. So to do that, what I would do is I would say result, the same result I want to convert is equal to JSON decode. So to encode is to convert an array into a string, and to decode is to get a string and convert it to an array. So here I know my array is inside result. This is the string that I got. So by doing this decode, I'm actually converting result from a string to an actual array. So to see that this is converted to an array, we can actually, let me just echo some pre-tags so that it looks much nicer. And then I can no longer echo this. I have to use print readable and paste result like that. So let's try this out and see. So now it looks like this because it's a string. If I now refresh, you should see an object instead. So you see now it says it's an object instead of a string. So it's got items here, properly formatted data. So this is somebody's name, street name. This is just random data as it is mentioned. If you want it to be an array instead of an object, just put true there on the JSON decode. And instead of an object, you will see it will say array. And there we go. So now it's an array because arrays have better functions that manipulate arrays. So sometimes you may want it to be an array. So in the same way, if I now, let me remove all of this. That way we don't see any data from here. If I now refresh, you see nothing. But if I fetch through this, we still get a string and not an object, right? So if you want to get an object instead, when you're using JavaScript instead of PHP, the process is the same. The result that you get here, instead of just echoing it out as it is, you can, let's do this. Let's do a console.log of this because we can't actually see this on the screen as an object because it can't be displayed in HTML as an object. So if I do console.log that, let's see what we get in there. So I'm going to inspect for a second here, go to the console. And if I refresh the page, okay, so it's still using my, let me remove this execute. That way it doesn't execute the curl up there so that we load immediately. Okay, so that causes problems because then result is not created. So let me do that. All right, let's refresh. Okay, there we go. So if I click fetch, you will see the result here. And there it is. This is some text that we got. So it's just text as it is, JSON text. But if I want to convert it to an object, all I need to do is use JSON. So here I'm going to do JSON.parse like this. So here in JavaScript, it's JSON.parse. In PHP is JSON decode. So there's JSON encode and JSON decode. So encode will convert your actual array into a string, and decode will convert your string into an array. Same thing here, we have the JSON.parse and we have JSON.stringify, which does converts an object into a string, and then parse converts a string into an object. So if I do that, instead of seeing a string like this, you will see something else instead. Let me refresh and let me click fetch. You will see now that it's an object, and if I click, this is the data in there. So now I can access things like, let's say, my object.title.id.userid, etc., etc. So hopefully you have learned something from here. Now, as I have mentioned, I go into detail on this topic in the playlist. There's a link in the description, so check that out and learn a bit more about APIs. I guarantee you learn something new there. All right, so until next time, I will see you in another tutorial.